Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. So what am I doing today? Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in May, and it has been a really fantastic reading month to say the least. So as I was sitting down, of course, I sort of have to have a structure in order to keep myself organized. So I'm going to be talking about books. The first group I'm going to be talking about are books that don't fit in any category for the month. Then I'm going to move into the books I read for May of the Moderns / it was kind of a happy coincidence, but we'll get into it. And then finally I'll end with all of the graphic novels that I read, but that will be a very quick section. Okay, so if you are new here, then hi, welcome. I'm Shelly, and I really love books and reading. So much so that I have a whole channel dedicated to my reading life and talking about books and talking about reading, talking about our relationships with books and all of that kind of stuff. Now, if you are into that kind of stuff, if you love books and reading, if you love discussing books, if you just like listening to someone cheerily talk about their reading life, then this is the place for you, and I would love for you to subscribe and stick around. Okay, but now let's just get into what I read for the month of May. Oh, you all, we are starting with a really good one. So the first book I read, or the first book I'm going to be talking about in which I read in May. I don't think that sentence made sense. You know what? We're moving on. I actually read this book with Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot. Sandy has a channel here on YouTube, and I'm going to link it down below because she is amazing. What are you doing with your life if you're not subscribed to her? And Sandy runs a book club here on YouTube, and it's all based on the 1001 books you must read before you die. And so, you know, since I must read them before I die, and I was feeling that kind of pressure, this month her pick was Wild Swans by Chang. Now, Wild Swans is a nonfiction book, and it was published in 1991. And what our author does, Chang, what she does is that she tells the history of China through the 21st century. Is that right? I'm having a moment. Through the 21st century. And she tells it through the story of her grandmother, her mother, and herself. And so I'm just going to launch into like why I love this book. Well, first of all, I had no idea what communism looked like sort of up close. I could sort of broadly tell you the concepts and the ideas supporting communism, but I didn't really know what it looked like, especially in modern China, essentially, or modern China throughout 100 years, essentially. And so what Chang does is that she is describing the Chinese government and Chinese history, but she's using the story of her grandmother, her mother and herself, in order to do that. And the reason why that's so brilliant, the reason why I think this book tends to stand out in people's memory, I've heard so many good things about this book, by the way, before I read it, from so many people on and off of BookTube, and I think one of the reasons is this. So what Chang does is that as she's telling her grandmother's story, she actually uses pronouns. She uses the pronouns in which her family members relate to her. And so on the one hand, an extra layer to this book to understand would be to grab onto who everybody is and how they're related to one another. But she actually takes all of that work away by saying and referencing my grandmother was married to this man, my grandmother did this, my grandmother did that. And so you're not having to reorient yourself constantly. Throughout the whole book, you're very much centered on the writer, Chang, and her family. And so I felt that like as a very comforting aspect, especially I was reading incredibly harrowing things in this book. I mean, this book has everything. Some of the visual images that I was able to conjure while reading this, I don't think will ever leave my consciousness because they were just so intense and surprising and horrific. And yeah, so anyway, as far as like using pronouns to help orient the reader, I thought that was a great writing device, especially for a book like this, and a book that has so many characters and so many names that one would have to memorize or get used to, or at least commit to some sort of schism in order to navigate the book, right? And then the other thing was that it felt very personal. So even though I was getting a broad look of China and what it was like to live there over the last, 100 years, like from 1900 to present day, essentially, kind of, or from 1900 to 1990, since this was published in the 90s. I was able to really understand why some of the approach the Chinese government uses is horrible, what the people have to go through, what their daily lives are like, what fear they have to manage, and really essentially like what life is like in China if you were a layman, if you were just working and living, and what that would be like. And it's harrowing. I learned so much from this book, and if you know me, I really love learning things from books, so I really, really enjoyed it. There were definitely, the structure of this book is a little bit backwards in that the best and most meatiest parts for me were happened in the first half of the book. And the second half of the book tends to become a little more detailed and a little more minute and granular, and I don't really care for that. And that tends to happen with books like this, especially when the writer is telling their own story. As the writer tends to get closer to present day, it's harder for them to truncate their story and to kind of leave out details. It's something that I noticed in memoir writing, nonfiction writing, and something that I wish that writers were a little bit better at, kind of streamlining the story all the way to the end. Kind of like this review. I'm going to stop now. I also want to mention that I discussed this book with Sandy and Sonja. Sonja is a subscriber and my personal buddy reader, y'all. You can't have her, okay? And I read it with her and I read it with Sandy, and it was a lot of fun. The next book I want to talk about came about really randomly. It wasn't part of my reading plans or anything, and what happened is that I had hauled the book recently, and then somebody reached out to me, Fraser Simons of Springboard Thought, and said, "Do you want to buddy read that?" And I was like, "Heck yes, I do." Now, did I have time for it? Not really, but that's all right. It ended up being a really, really great buddy read, and a really great and fun book. So the book I'm talking about is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. So The Idiot follows the main character of Selene, and Selene is a freshman at Harvard, I think in the year of 1995, gracious me, when email is brand new. And so it's taking you through, the novel is taking you through Selene's college experience, especially during this time that technology is starting to explode. And so this novel brought me back, okay? It brought me back. Now, I attended college after 1995, so I'm not completely aligned with Selene's experience, the experience of the main character. However, there is this sense that technology is really new, that Selene herself is having this kind of awkward and odd and very like internal college experience. Batuman is so smart. She's so clever, because what kept me going with this book is her witticisms, her cleverness, her humor. And she does that by sort of introducing what Fraser and I ended up calling an ecosystem of references. So she'll talk about things like Russian literature, and then she'll define it and talk about what she thinks about it, or she'll maybe riff on it or joke about it or have a witticism tied to it. And then she'll kind of repeat that reference throughout, and it ends up being a way that we can see the main character Selene and what she is relating to and how she sees the world, but we're also getting kind of like these little inside jokes along the way, and they only build as it keeps going. And so there was something about that I found really charming. I will say that Selene, she's a little bit difficult to connect with because she is so quiet and insecure with herself, but in some ways I found that very charming. But I could see that if somebody read this book, they would actually critique that about Selene, that they would say that she was hard to get to know, she was hard to understand. But I didn't feel that way at all. And I would say that the story anchors itself on a kind of awkward sort of first love, emphasis on the awkward love story. Technology's involved, miscommunication's involved, and it's a lot of fun, but it's definitely kind of that, I would say that the target audience is millennial females who had a campus experience and who were probably quite awkward. Now, does that describe me exactly? Possibly. So basically this book was like written for me, and not surprisingly, I really liked it. And what was great was that Fraser and I definitely came at this book from different perspectives with different ideas, and there were times where he definitely helped me out understanding like a reference, an idea, a concept, a quote, and there were times where I did the same for him. And so it was just a really fruitful and wonderful buddy read, and a really great book to read and dive in about, you know what I mean? Now we have entered probably my favorite section of this whole wrap up, and that is May of the Moderns. So May of the Moderns was ran by Margaret Pernard here on YouTube. I will link her channel down below, and she was looking to celebrate modern writers, which are writers that wrote between 1900 and 1950 about. And you know, it was just such wonderful happenstance that I was already reading a bunch of modern writers, and so I was like, yes, I can basically win this readathon without even trying. And so yeah, so anyway, so the first book I read with Angie at the channel Brown Nymph Bookaholic, and we read Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This was published in 1937, and I'm going to tell you the sort of the exposition in the way that I experienced it. So, across the street you see a figure that looks quite familiar, and as the murmurings are going on, everybody is noticing that there is this person that looks really familiar, and all of a sudden everyone realizes that it is Gein, the young quiet gal, you know, the real sweet one that was married to that jerk a while back, and she's returned back, and it's been years, and she looks different, and I'm so nosy that I must know, / everybody's putting pressure on me to go find out what has happened to Gein in the last several years. And so this is how I experienced it. And so basically I'm going to break from this narrative. I don't know how well it's going. But basically I, or Jainie's friend, wanders over to her house and asks Jainie what's been going on for the last several years, and she launches into her story, and it is an incredible one. It is one about love and loss, and oh my goodness, it's about the way that we treat one another, and it's the way that we sometimes put up with the way that we're treated, and she tells the most wonderful and incredible story, and it has you hooked from start to finish, or at least it had me hooked from start to finish, if we are keeping this metaphor going like quite well, which I think it didn't quite work out. But so anyways, I'm just gonna break. So Zora Neale Hurston, again, it's about the protagonist Gein and her life, and it is a really incredible life, especially if you love a very strong and very astute thought process about male-female relationships and what that might look like in a post-Civil War Black community, essentially. And the book is told in dialect, which only added to the experience. Oh my gosh, it was just, everything was so wonderful about it. And I have to say, if you are having trouble getting into the dialect, or you are like one of those people who shies away from books because of dialect, I have to say that there is an audio version of this narrated by Ruby D, and it is not just like she narrated it, it is the performance of a lifetime. So if you're having trouble getting into this and you want like a different form, or you want a way in which to experience the language but without maybe like struggling through some of the dialect, or if that's just not your thing and you just want to experience it in a different and totally cool way, I cannot highly recommend the audiobook enough for Their Eyes Were Watching God. It was beautiful, it was wonderful, and I'm so glad that I finally met Zora Neale Hurston, because I think we're going to have a long and wonderful relationship. The next buddy read I did, and it was a modern. Actually, all of my modern writers were buddy reads as well. I read this book with Elisabeth from Bookins and Books, who is just the most incredible booktuber. She's the one that got me into the BookTube prize. Basically, this is my pitch that you should go and follow Elisabeth, because she is wonderful and she's incredibly thoughtful and the perfect person to have done this particular buddy read with. So we are talking about The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. Now, I feel like I have not read a book ever until I read this one. This is wow. Okay, where do I start? I need a moment to gather my thoughts. Thoughts have been gathered. We're back at it. Okay, so, and I've calmed down. Okay, so let's talk about The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. This is my very first Edith Wharton, and it won't be my last. She is an incredible writer. Okay, so before I actually get into it, so this was published in 1905, and it was set in 1870s. And in the story, we are following a woman in society named Lily Bart. And Lily Bart is not a very likable character, but she also, in her position in society, she doesn't have a lot of money. However, she is somehow wheeling and dealing and spending having a grand time with New York's elite. And so it's really Lily Bart's story as she is navigating a very vicious and complex society that has their own rules and really will chew someone up and spit them out. And we are getting Lily Bart's perspective, somebody who is beautiful and incredibly charming and in a lot of ways wants to maintain her own agency, but is also like makes some really serious mistakes as she is navigating through, you know, society's elite in the 1870s in New York. So now what was so great about this book? Oh my gosh, okay. Well, first of all, Edith Wharton's writing is known to be absolute perfection. She was clearly trained as a classical writer, and so therefore knows all of the rules. And you can tell that even on a sentence level, her writing is gorgeous. She draws these absolutely stunning metaphors. She knows the classics, so she is referencing ancients, and she's making classical references in the correct manner. And she's, you know, there's no airs. Like she knows. The Wharton knows, okay? But on top of that, she created a character that got me talking with Elisabeth, my buddy reader, on matters that I was just like, what, you know, can you help me out? I was like, Lily Bart is actually set up to not be somebody very likable, and yet I had a ridiculous amount of compassion for her, and I had to ask my buddy reader, why do I feel compassion for Lily Bart? Which was a really interesting phenomenon, and so we were able to discuss that. Let's see, other things that are wonderful about the book. It's set in a really cool time period, so like New York in the 1870s, so you're thinking of just this time period where everybody's like still sort of hoity-toity and following the rules, but playing cards, and I mean, it's just like a really cool setting, and all of the characters are very complex and very, very interesting and don't feel flat at all. Okay. Maybe I just need to do a dedicated review on all of the moderns I read this month. I did tell a group of friends that I felt like I had never read a book before until I read this book, because I just thought that Edith Wharton's writing was so good. It's just so well done. So anyway, so if you are the kind of reader who wants to experience art at an incredibly high level, if you want an experience that you don't want to ever forget, maybe I'm overhyping it. This was just a really good book for me, and I'm so glad I read it. Elisabeth, thank you for reading it with me, and I actually, I'm already itching to reread it. I already want to know. I want to reread this again. I want to read Age of Innocence. Basically want to read everything Edith Wharton wrote. Okay, I'm gonna stop. The final book I'm actually in an ongoing discussion with my buddy reader about, and so I'm going to just touch on it kind of lightly, and maybe I'll cycle back around to it later. But again, another modern writer. Oh gracious, this has happened to me yet again. I keep on forgetting. Okay, to see when something was published. Okay, so I am talking about To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, and it was published in 1927. So let's see, Virginia Woolf, again, sort of I think the pinnacle, the quintessential modernist writer, because of the way that she played around with stream of consciousness writing. This book. Okay, so this is my third Virginia Woolf. Am I just avoiding talking about the book because I don't know where to start? I'll keep it brief. Okay, so this is my third Virginia Woolf in the last, I would say, 10 months. I first read Mrs. Dalloway, then I read A Room of One's Own, both of which I absolutely loved, and now I have To the Lighthouse, and oh my goodness, I really love this book. So this really centers on a family, a couple who have children named Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, and their small social circle in which they're connected. And I don't, it's like, it's a book in some ways that's sort of about mundanity, the day-to-day life, and yet you are, as the characters are experiencing their life, you are inside of their head, and you're getting their impressions of everyone else and the people around them. So you're getting the descriptions of a certain character's perspective of others, and then it will just switch. And so all of a sudden, like for example, you'll be in Mrs. Ramsey's head, and she's talking about her thoughts about Mr. Ramsey, and in a lot of ways that helps you understand who Mr. Ramsey is and what he means to Mrs. Ramsey. But then it will switch. It will switch to Mrs. Ramsey's child, and you'll get his thoughts and ideas about his parents, which again sort of helps you reorient yourself with the characters. And I thought that was such a cool technique because I love when we see the judgments of others and the way that a character can change based on whose head we're in. And so basically this was like a perfect book for me. And on top of that, Virginia Woolf explores a lot of the ideas that she presents in A Room of One's Own. So for example, Mr. Ramsey doesn't think very highly of his wife. He doesn't think that she's very intelligent, and in a lot of ways that aligns with the essay A Room of One's Own. And yet she totally subverts that idea and Virginia Woolf proves that Mr. Ramsey is incorrect because we are inside of Mrs. Ramsey's head, and we realize that she's incredibly intelligent and incredibly emotionally deft, and she knows how to navigate certain situations with absolute grace. And so we're watching Virginia Woolf explore these ideas, and I just thought it was fascinating. It was fascinating. There's also a section in here called Time Passes, and it has to be one of my favorite work of prose that I've read in a long time. It is a description of decay, and I found out that I really like descriptions of decay. So I'm sort of in ongoing conversations with my buddy reader. Her name is Liz. She's wonderful, and I'm excited to hear back and see what she has to say. I also discussed this with my friend Sonja because I discuss a lot of books with Sonja, and she graciously read this with me as I was also reading it with Liz. And so we were able to kind of talk about our feelings along the way. I wanted to mention that and say thank you to them. And just know that this book was so good. I want to reread it. Man, all these books I just want to reread. Can I just live in a cycle in which I reread Wharton and Woolf over and over and over until I die? That would not be a bad reading life, okay? Okay, I'm going to quickly talk about the graphic novels that I read, but I have a whole dedicated video about my graphic novels and the project, and you'll definitely get more in-depth thoughts, but I'll do kind of like a rapid fire, like kind of deal with it, okay? Okay? So I'll start with my least favorite to my most favorite. So my least favorite was Commute by Erin Williams. Watch the video to see in-depth thoughts about it. Then I would say that my next one was probably Blankets. Oh, no, not Blankets. That's the next one. Okay, as a spoiler alert to my own video, it was Raymond Briggs' Where the Wind Blows. I enjoyed this, but it didn't blow me away. And I had recently read a different book, John Hersey's Hiroshima, about the same topic that Raymond Briggs speaks about, which is the effects of an atomic bomb. And I liked Hiroshima better, though I thought that this was, a good piece of literature. Not terrible, but not my favorite. Okay, the next one was, I would say, if we're going backwards up to my favorite, it would be Blankets by Craig Thompson. This tells the story of a young man who's struggling with his faith, and it really takes you through his coming of age story with that lens, and I thought it was a charming and effective read. The next two, I don't know, they're kind of tied. They're kind of tied. I'll go. So the next one would be did you hear what Eddie Gein done? So Eddie Gein is the real life serial killer here in the US that inspired Psycho and scenes from Silence of the Lambs. And I thought this was particularly effective for somebody like me. I'm a sensitive reader, and though I'm interested in serial killers, I often avoid that topic because of my sensitivities. But I found out that because of a graphic novel, it helped me it was vague enough that it didn't conjure up frightening images, you know? So I really enjoyed this, and I thought the story of Eddie Gein was really, really compelling. The writing was great. And yeah, I really love this. If you want, again, more in-depth thoughts, the graphic novel video is going to be for you. And then I get, my favorite book, for the art, for the humor, for its touchingness, kind of for everything. I read In by Will McPhail. This was my favorite book of the project of my graphic novel reading month. And it was so effective. So In is talking about the main character, Nick, who is having trouble connecting with others, and for good reason. And it really explores our connection and openness with other people. And I felt like everything supported that idea. The humor, the artwork, the illustrations, the use of color. I mean, all of it really supported and explored the idea about why we sometimes feel blocked up when we are trying to make an honest and concerted effort with someone else. And not why, but it tells you like Nick's story, like his perspective, why he's struggling to do that. And I just loved it. I thought it was great, and it really made me laugh out loud several times. Okay, so that's it. Yay! Wow, I had a really great reading month. Tell me what you read. What were some of the highlights for you? My highlights were definitely, oh gracious, it had to have been the moderns. The modern women that I read were phenomenal. The graphic novels were amazing. I mean, everything, I had such a great reading month. How can I even choose? So anyways, but that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you all in my next one. Bye guys.